Hey everyone. If you've seen many of my LBP videos, you've probably noticed that I wear modded costumes in some of them, all of which that I've made myself. And I wanted to show a video of how some of those are made. So in this video, I'm going to be turning this Hatsune Miku outfit into a costume set for Sackboy. The model comes from the game Project Mirai for the song Electric Love. The outfits from that game work really well for this kind of thing because the proportions are similar to Sackboy. So the types of costumes we'll be making for this costume set is a headpiece, a torso, skirt, shoes, eyes, and this microphone. So the first thing we have to do is import a model of Sackboy from the game so that we can try and fit the outfit onto him. When the model gets imported, he is facing downwards, which does make it kind of awkward to work with. You could change it just while you're editing the models. It's just important that he returns to this orientation when you export the models later. But a more important issue with this model is that if you turn on the rest position, he becomes kind of distorted, which needs to be fixed. Thankfully, it's pretty easy to fix though. You just need this plugin for Blender called Cats. Once you have it, all you have to do is go into pose mode with the model, and then press apply as rest pose. It'll probably take a second, and then it'll fix it. It's important that you don't press this button here in Cats that says start pose mode. That's different than pressing pose mode up here, it won't work. But now the model is ready to be worked with. I will rotate it though, just so it's easier to see what we're doing. Alright, that's nicer. I'm also just going to turn up the clip start and end. So let's get our Miku model. It's pretty small, so I'll just scale the whole thing up. I'm going to be starting with the hair, just because that's always the easiest thing to do. And just to make this easier, I will set the origin to geometry. Okay. Now this is pretty straightforward. All I'm going to do right now is just try and position the hair so it so it looks natural on Sackboy's head. It doesn't really look good here because it's like the back of it's going inside of his head. So that's where it's kind of good to kind of have to scale it in the right direction. Alright, I'm just going to go with that for now. So once it's positioned, now we have to rig the costume. But for hair, it's pretty easy because it all moves together. So all we do is click on the hair and then also select the Sackboy model. Right click, parent with empty groups. So now the hair is a part of the rest of Sackboy's model. But now we have to actually attach it to one of the bones. And you find the list of bones in this menu under vertex groups. So for the hair, we want to find the one called head, this one here. And all we do is go into edit mode with tab or clicking it up here, and make sure the weight is set to 1, and just press assign, and that's it. So now the hair is pretty much done. And we can see the weighting by going into weight paint mode, and the hair being red is a good thing. It might not look like it, but we can see how much each bone controls the costume with how red it is. And red being it's completely controlled. So we can even test it out right now by going into pose mode, finding the head bone, and rotating it. So now we can see it moving with Sackboy's head, which is exactly what we want. Right, and now for the more difficult things, which is the clothing. Clothing is a lot harder to fit onto his body than just hair. I'm also just going to hide the hair for this. We just want to focus on these costume pieces. So like I said earlier, we're going to be doing a torso piece, the skirt, and shoes. The skirt is probably going to be easier, so I'm going to do that next. So the first thing we have to do for that is separate it from the model, because everything here is connected right now. So I need to extract the skirt, which should be pretty easy. We can select one face of the skirt and then press Ctrl L, which will select the linked polygons. In this case, it didn't really get all of them. We can go into wireframe and select more, just until we have all of them. That looks like we have all of them. Yep, great. So now we right click, separate selection. So now we have the skirt as a separate object, which I'm just going to rename quickly. Okay, great. So now, like before, I'm just going to move it over to Sackboy, and I'm going to try fitting it onto him. So here, I don't really want to make the bottom of the skirt any bigger, just because it'll go into Sackboy's hands. But I need the top to be more wide. So what I like to do is go into edit mode and wireframe, and select like just the top ring of vertices, and scale those. Or just only the top one. That didn't really work. Like that. So now I can control the positioning around Sackboy's waist without affecting the rest of the model. It's like you can make the models however you want as long as it's just not clipping into those certain parts of him. Like, it's going around his legs and around his waist, so it's fine. Oh, no it's not. That doesn't look good. I'll just grab this part. The part that's clipping, and just move it. Actually I'm gonna need to scale it because it doesn't fit. One thing I am gonna get rid of though is there's a layer underneath the skirt here. You could keep this if you wanted to, but it's not really necessary. It's just, I'm just getting rid of it so we don't have as much to rig later. I'm also gonna try and fix this black around the top of the skirt. It's there because it's meant to be the shadow of the shirt part over here, but since the shirt and the skirt aren't going to line up perfectly like how they were before, it's going to look weird if it stays there. So we just need to go into the UV editor. In here we can see where the shadow is. So we just select the vertices that are in the shadow and move them away from it with scaling and translation. Something like that. Okay, and that's pretty much the skirt done now, as far as the fitting goes. It does look brighter on the back here, but that's just because of the lighting within Blender. So now we're going to rig the skirt, which is a bit more interesting than what we did with the hair. We do the same type of process, but it's a bit more involved. So once we parent it, like before, costumes like this, like skirts and torso pieces, they get rigged to Sackboy's spine. See, there's a bone in here called Spine 1, but we also have one just called Spine. I always forget which one's which, because one is higher up in his body and one's lower. And it's important that we do the right one. We can sort of check which one's which though by going into pose mode and just moving them around and seeing what happens. So let's find one. So Spine 1 is the top half of Sackboy's body, and Spine is the rest. So we want the skirt to move with the bottom half of Sackboy's body, which is Spine. Right, so let's get our skirt and go into edit mode. Make sure we select everything. That's something I didn't say earlier. We want to select all of the skirt, which we can do by just pressing A. So get our spine that we found from earlier, which was just spine, and pressing assign. But something that's important to know with skirts and things like that, or dresses, is when Sackboy jumps, he lifts his legs like way up, almost parallel with the ground. So if we try and like simulate that by moving his leg, it's gonna go through the skirt, which doesn't really look very natural or good at all. So the way we fix that is we have to do some more rigging. And something I'm gonna do just to make this easier is, you'll see if I try and move one of these polygons, it doesn't move with the trim here, just because of the way the model was made. So just to get around that, I'm gonna go mesh cleanup, merge by distance. This makes it so everything's just connected properly, so now I can move parts of the top around and it'll also move the trim. So now to make the skirt move with his legs, we need to set part of the skirt model to move with the thigh bones. The way Sackboy's skeleton is set up is that beneath his spine he has a thigh, calf, and a foot in that order, and the thigh being the highest part of his leg. Sometimes you just have to experiment which parts of the costumes you want controlled by the thighs, but it's generally like in this sort of area, like right to the next to his leg. And just to make this easier, I'm gonna hide his hands just because they're kind of in the way. Alright, now we can see everything. So I'm just gonna grab a good chunk of this area and assign it to his thigh. But before we attach it to his thigh, the thigh bone, we have to remove it from the spine because we can't really have polygons parented to multiple bones. So before we assign it to the thigh, we select the spine bone from earlier, remove it, and then select his right thigh and assign it. So now we can look at the weighting and it looks a bit more interesting. We can actually see more of a gradient going on. So now we can test it again, go into the pose mode and select his right thigh, which is what we just attached it to. So now when we move it, the skirt actually moves around with his leg more and it's not going to clip so much. It is clipping into itself there, which we might just end up fixing later, but that's the basic concept of getting that to work. So just to make it even, I'm going to try and select the exact same polygons on the other side, because these models are usually symmetrical. Cool, and now we have a skirt that should be rigged properly. So now the next one we'll do is the shirt, which might be the hardest one to do, but it shouldn't be too bad. Thankfully the shirt doesn't have sleeves on it, because adding sleeves for Sackboy is kind of a whole thing. Again, I'm going to do the same thing. We're just going to scale it and move it around until it looks alright. And we'll adjust specific things when we need to. Sometimes the best option for making these kinds of things is just to hide parts of Sackboy's body, because you can see it's kind of clipping through the shirt there. You are able to hide things, so you just don't even have to deal with them, because you can also hide them in the game. But I think I can actually get away with not doing that here. Even if I did hide it, it would make Sackboy's arms kind of attached to nothing, which I don't really want. Sometimes you have to just edit the models like this just to make things fit properly. I don't love doing it, but it's the only thing that'll make this work, really. And it doesn't look that bad either. Okay, I think this is as good as the torso piece is gonna get. And we can always come back and edit it later. So we're gonna parent it to our model. So now we can start rigging it. Alright, so pretty much how we rig torso pieces is the top half gets the top spine and the bottom half gets the other spine. So the way I'm going to do that, I'm just going to get the whole thing and attach it to the top spine, like this. Now, I will go into wireframe and select just the bottom half. And then remove that from the spine and then add it to the other one. So now when I look at the weighting, I can see how they're divided. Wrong one. Now something I haven't really mentioned yet, when it comes to making these custom modded outfits, there isn't really any way to add like physics simulations like the original costumes have. So sometimes I just like to fake them by doing it through rigging. So an example of that would be rigging this tie so that when Sackboy jumps it sort of like flies up into the air. And we can do that because there's a bone for Sackboy's zipper. There's actually two of them. Because when Sackboy jumps in the game, his zipper like angles itself upwards, so it looks like it's like moving in the air. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get the tie object, make sure I have all of it, which I don't. It's not actually attached, but it's fine as long as we have it. And then I'm just going to get not quite the top, just this part here. Remove it from our spine, and then add it to the second zipper bone. The first zipper bone is like, actually I'll just show it. The first zipper bone controls just this, the top part, which doesn't actually move much. But the second bone is what controls the pull part of the zipper, which is what actually moves around. Oh, I forgot to remove the bottom half of the tie from that bone too. Better do that. There, great. Oh, I didn't do it. That one. Getting my bones confused. It might not look very good, so it's always fine just to test things out, just to see if they work or not, and if they don't, you can just remove them later. There is this shadow though underneath. We don't really want that there because the shadow won't move with the tie. So like before, I'm gonna get the torso piece and just edit its UVs so that it doesn't have that in it. Okay, well that probably could have been done better, but I just removed the black beneath the tie, most of it anyway. Cool, well now we've got our skirt, shirt, and hair. Alright, so all we have left now is the shoes, the eyes, and the microphone. I'm gonna quickly do the eyes just because I kind of already have them made. Alright, so here are some eyes that I made a long time ago. They have pretty much the exact model that I want, so I'm not gonna remake them, but I'll still show how to rig them. The only thing I need to change actually is just the texturing. So instead of this material for the eyes, I need to use this other one that's in this model texture for it just on the ground. I can actually delete that. I also need to change the eyebrows because in the original one they're blue, not black. So they're actually going to use the same material as the eye, but I just need to fix the UV mapping. So let's make these, the eyebrows, a darker blue color. Let's just put them somewhere in here. It doesn't really matter. Something like that. And then get the, whatever these things are. These need to be black still. So let's just make them super tiny and put them in the black part. That's good enough for this kind of thing. Awesome. Got eyes. Okay, these are already rigged, so I just need to parent them. But I will quickly go through how eyes are rigged. I better position them in the right spot too, shouldn't I? They should go around there. It doesn't need to be exact. I'll hide Sackboy's old eyes. So when you're rigging eyes, it's kind of confusing because there's 4 different eye bones. But for most situations, you just want to ignore the position ones, the ones that say POS on them. So the left eye is rigged to bone eye left, and the right eye is bone eye right. You don't really need to use the position bones. Those bones are for Sackboy's actual face. When Sackboy blinks, his face model moves slightly, which is what the position bones are for, but they're not needed for eyes like this. Right, so that's the eyes done. I'm going to do the microphone last, so next thing we'll do is the boots, which is a bit different than all the ones we did before, because if we actually tried to fit these onto Sackboy's feet, it would be like super hard, and it wouldn't look good at all. Since Sackboy has this like angle on his calf, and his legs aren't even like symmetrical, it just makes it super difficult to fit like custom models onto his feet. So instead, I'm going to be using these shoes that I've taken from the game, which are already rigged and everything. Pretty much all I have to do is texture them. Alright, so once they're positioned, I will assign the material, which is that one. And I'll try to copy what the original boots do. Alright, so pretty much all of it goes in this grey area, basically. I'm not too worried about like the actual shading here. The top of the left boot and the bottom of the right boot are pink, but the soles are not like that. So like before, we can go into wireframe to try and just select a specific section and then just move it into the pink area. Even though technically the soles shouldn't be pink, I'm just gonna do it anyway, just because it'll be easier. And then do the same for the other color. So now we've got that. Now, something I actually wanted to show off is how to make things glow or just use existing materials in the game, and this is going to be a good opportunity to do that kind of thing. I should have done this earlier, but all we have to do is assign the colored parts to a different material, which I'll do again quickly. It doesn't actually matter what the material is called as long as it's just different. Alright, so now we just have to get an existing material from the game to replace it with. And I already have one for the blue, which I will just go and quickly get an image of. Alright, so this is a pretty good material to use for a glowing blue color. So I just have to move the UVs so that it's in the blue section, like that. I know the foot is sticking out, but we're going to fix that later. And now I just have to do the same for the pink. There's only really one purple glowing material in the game that I know of. And it's actually this skin for the zombie girl, because the lip part actually glows as well. So I'm just going to put everything in this purple section. I mean, it is kind of not the right color, but there's not much I can really do with the materials that are in the game. Just try and find a brighter spot, I guess. Now I'm just going to add the bows onto the shoes that are on the original ones. And to do that, I'm just going to select them as best as I can and then copy them over. And I want these to glow as well, so I'm going to assign them this. And just put them in the pink. Yeah, that's good enough. I'm just going to join them onto the boots right now. And then for the other side, I'm just going to duplicate it. Right, cool. Those are pretty nice shoes. They are mostly rigged already, but we haven't actually done the bows, so we have to do that quickly. I'm just going to assign it to the calf bone. That should be good enough. Alright, sick. Now we can delete these, don't really need them. And that's pretty much the whole costume except for the microphone, which is actually pretty easy to do as well. And I'm just going to hide everything that we've made so I can just see the... So it's just easier to place the microphone. So the way that hand costumes work is that the hand that holds the object is actually included in the costume. It's like that so the material of Sackboy's hand can change to the one that the player is wearing. So the first thing we're going to do is just duplicate the hand object so that we can attach it to the microphone object. So we have a hand duplicate, and I'll hide the original. And now I'm going to just place the microphone in his hand in a way that I think it looks good. There is another hands model you can use where Sackboy's fist is closed if you want to, but I think the open hand will work well enough for this type of costume. Great, so now I'm going to parent the microphone to Sackboy, and then I'm going to attach the mic to his hand and not the other way around. Also, sometimes when you copy parts of Sackboy's body, it keeps all of these shape keys, which is just below the bones. You don't really need these, and they just make the file size bigger, so just delete them all. Now, even though we copied the hand and it does have rigging already, like for the fingers, we actually have to change it for hand objects. So the way that is done is we just select everything, remove everything from the right hand, including all the fingers, like this, and also the hand itself. And all we have to do is assign it to the forearm. Like that. So now the whole thing is just Sackboy's forearm. And we can test the movement. And we can see how he holds it. Looks pretty good, I think, actually. And that's basically the entire model done, which we got 6 different outfits out of. So the next thing we have to do is set them up so they can be used in the game. Actually, something that I forgot that I wanted to do was just make the headbands also glow like the shoes do. Alright, so we've made the models. So the next thing that we need are icons for the costumes, which are based on the models. So I'm just going to get rid of all of Sackboy, because we don't actually need his model anymore. All we need now is just the actual costume pieces themselves. So to make icons in Blender, we're going to go down to Film and turn on Transparent. So our background is transparent. And we also need a camera, which I'm just going to rotate and move away from Sackboy, and also scale it. So we've got this camera view. Okay, that's good enough. But now the more important thing is like the lighting. It's very dark, so let's just make it brighter. The shadows aren't super important because it's just like icons and they're going to be pretty small, but it does look kind of unnatural without shadows. So we'll just create a sun and just place it. Try and find settings that look okay. Again, I'm not worried too much just because it's there in the icons. I also just saved it because I'm probably going to be moving the objects around to make them look okay for the icon. So I can just come back to this if I need to. Alright, let's do the eyes first. And I'll open up this view so we can see the render result as well. I'm also just going to change the size of the image because it doesn't really need to be that big. And then just make these fit inside. Like that. And now we just render it. There's our icon. And now I'll just do that for the rest of the costumes. I am just getting rid of this black though on the hair because it's like, doesn't really look good for the icon. And also for the microphone, I'm going to remove the hand because it's not really part of the costume. And for the shoes, I only keep one shoe in the icon. Alright, cool. So those are all the icons made. I'm just going to reopen this project so that I can come back to this version of it. Cool. Now that we've made all of our icons, we can export the model now too. But since we rotated it to stand back up at the start, we have to put it back down to where it was. Otherwise it won't work. What I like to do to export the models is hide everything that we're not exporting. And then we go File, Export, GLTF. And then, I know you can't see the dialog, but under Include, I just select Visible Objects. And then you just export it. And we'll just do that for the rest of them. Now that we have our icons and models, we're completely done with Blender, and we can just make the costumes now. Alright, so this is where we start using a tool called Workbench to build all of the assets that we just created. I'm not going to go through how to install or use Workbench, but I will show how we set up the assets to build the mods with. So the first thing we're going to do is just make folders for all of the costumes that we made, and give them names. I've just been using this electric name to refer to all of them. So we had hair, What else do we have? Shoes, torso, skirts, eyes, and the mic. And here I've just brought in everything that we exported for this. You also might want to compress the icon files, since they're kind of bigger than they need to be at first, and there's only so much space to install mods on your profile in the game. But once you have these, we just have to move them into the folders that they belong to, but first rename them to icon, and then put it into the folder that it needs to be in. Also, they don't need to be called icon, this is just how I like to organize them. And then we do the same thing for the models, except instead of icon we call them mesh. Alright, now we've got all of our assets in their folders. All we have to do now is create the config files, which isn't too hard to do, but it can be a bit difficult at first. So we'll be doing the configuration for the hair first, because it'll probably be one of the easier ones. So the config is in a JSON format, and these are all of the properties that we can set for it, which I'll go through now. The title is just the name of the costume, which I will just call Electric Love Hair. The author is, well, obviously whoever made it. I'm just going to put that name. Most of these are pretty self-explanatory for what they represent. This category property isn't super important for modded costumes because they don't really appear in the right category on the costumes menu, but it's still good to set it up. So even though this is hair, the category is actually head because we don't want to be able to wear headpieces with this hair because it's so big, basically. The theme is not really important, but I always just put something in there. Now the overrides and the categories are what's important here. The categories here is what the costume will actually be when you equip it. Meaning, if you put it on and it's in the hair category, if you try to put on another piece of hair, it will unequip it and put that other hair on. So you're basically writing down what costumes you don't want to be worn with this costume. So in this case, it's hair costumes and head costumes. And now the override section is pretty useful because it lets you replace a material in your model with one that already exists in the game, which is what we're going to be using to make parts of the hair glow, which is what we set up earlier. So to do that, we have to go back to the Blender project and get the names of the materials that we want to replace. And if you remember from earlier, I called them red and blue. So I'll just write them down. Red and blue. But now we have to go and get the reference to the material that we want to use instead of this. So to do that, we get Toolkit, which lets you explore the file archive for the game. And we find a material that we want from, well, any of the materials that are in here. So for the blue, I wanted the neon material, which is called Tron. And this is the material I want. And then to reference it, you get the GUID. And just copy it. And then back in our config file, we put the GUID after the material name, without the G though. So now the material called blue in our model will be replaced with the material with this GUID in the file archive. And so now I'll just do the same thing for red quickly. And that's about it for the config. Now we just have to do that for the other costumes. But just so we don't have to do all of that again, I'm just going to copy this config and we'll do the shoes next and put it in the shoes one. So now I can just replace this with shoes, change the category to feet. This costume only has one category, unlike the hair, so I can just get rid of that and just write feet on its own. But something we have to fix now is that, if you remember from earlier when we were making the shoes, the feet were clipping out of the shoes. So what we can do is add a new section called regions. And what regions does is that it lets us write down what parts of Sackboy's body we want to hide when we equip the costume. And so since the feet were clipping out of the shoes earlier, we can write down feet. And now that part of the his body will be hidden when we equip that costume. So that's the shoes config done. And it's a similar thing for the eyes, except we, again, change everything that we need to. We don't actually need the overrides for this, so we'll just get rid of them. And the category here is just called eyes. But it's a good idea, even though it might not necessarily be like noticeable. We should probably make a region for this one too, for Sackboy's eyes, because his eyes are technically a part of his like base model, so the black button eyes will be there if we don't put a region in. The skirt is kind of weird because we kind of have to, it's not really clear what category it should go in, because you could wear pants with it and it wouldn't really clip into it anything, which is why I'm going to put it in the waist category, which might not make a lot of sense, but I think it's okay. And again, we don't need overrides. The torso piece is kind of interesting because we need more regions for it, but it's, again, pretty straightforward. The only one we really had to hide was the zipper. So we need zip for one, and zip pull, since they are different models. Alright, so the last one we have to do now is just the microphone, which goes into the hands category. And we'll just call it, I'm not going to call it like electric microphone or whatever. Hand microphone, I don't know, it doesn't really matter. It's not really a part of the costume set, so I'm just going to call it the description. Sing your heart out. We also need a region for Sackboy's right hand. And the name for that is literally just right hand. Hand. But what we still need to set up is making it so that the hand model that's in the microphone changes to what material Sackboy is wearing. Which is pretty simple because it's just done by overrides. So I didn't actually change these names. So Sackboy's base material is called Sackboy Weave Base. And the GUID is that. But that wasn't actually everything. I also had the stitching on his hand in the model. And while that might work as it is, it's better just to like use the material that's in the game so it's just accurate, and so that I'm not like wasting space by making it identical materials. I think that's it. Cool, and that should be everything for the config. Which means all of our costumes are completely set up now, and we can build it and actually go and test it in game. Again, I'm not going to go through how to use Workbench to build things, but feel free to message me about it if you need to know. But once it is built, we will get this folder, which has this mod file in it. And that's what we can install, which I will do now. So back in Toolkit, once you've loaded your profile, you can go install mods, go and find where it is. And now we have these new folders in our costumes, which has the costumes in them. So now I will move this profile to my PS3 and we'll see them in game. Sorry to have to do this, but I just realized there's an error in some of these configs. I accidentally spelled region instead of regions in the shirt and also the microphone. Alright, now I can test it. Alright, and here we are in game. I put the costumes down at the bottom of this section. Yeah, we see the eyes blinking and everything. So now we can actually have a look at some of these things that we've rigged, like the thighs moving with the skirt. And I think it actually looks pretty good. I don't think I would change it. And also the tie. It's a bit hard to see with how he's moving, but the tie moves up. when Sackboy comes down. And you can also see that the zipper has been removed as well. The glowing materials have also worked. I just wish there were better colors we could have used, but that's basically exactly what I was expecting them to look like. And finally the microphone works as well. But if I put on another material, we can see that the hand changes with it. So pretty good, actually. I actually really like this costume. I'd love to fix some of these things with it. Like, you can see the tie is clipping into the shirt. And let's just go look at how the glowing materials look in the darkness. And yeah, I would definitely change these if I could. I just prefer using LBP1 materials so that the builds work in every single game. But I mean, overall, this is kind of better than I was hoping for with this costume. I wanted to do a Miku outfit that wasn't the default one, just because I know a few people have done that already. And I think this was a good choice. Hi, it's me from 1 week later. I just wanted to show the changes that I've made to this costume. The first thing is the tie. I made it a lot shorter so it doesn't clip into the shirt so much. It does still clip a little bit, but that's only in certain positions. Also, I didn't realize that the eyes have the same spelling error with the regions from before. So Sackboy's original eyes are actually still there, which I will fix. The next biggest difference are for the glowing parts. I found a way better material for the pink that actually looks pink now, and it glows way more than before. I've also put back the black outlines that were on the squares for the pigtails, which I think looks a lot cleaner. I also took away the glowing parts on the soles of the shoes, since I think that looks better too. And for anyone wondering where the new pink material comes from, it actually comes from the Metropolis background, with this pink glowing sign. The great thing with referencing materials is that they don't have to come from existing costumes, they can come from anywhere in the game. So it's really beneficial sometimes to look around to see what you can find. But I hope this video has been interesting, especially for those who might be thinking of making their own costumes. And feel free to suggest more costumes that I could make. I really can't think of many more to do just because I've made everything that I've ever wanted. But anyway, thanks for watching.